12.8 seconds into lap 7 of the San Marino Grand Prix in 1994, the Brazilian Formula One racing driver Ayrton Senna crashed and died.
One of the world's greatest racing drivers, Ayrton Senna, has died.
Uma corrida que entra para a história da Fórmula 1 como sinônimo de pesadelo.
It was too late for doctors to do anything to save him. Tonight the world of...
The racing world was stunned. Why did Senna, a triple world champion, suddenly veer off the road? This program uses the car's own computer data to solve that mystery, analysing moment by moment the 12.8 seconds that changed motorsport forever. Disasters don't just happen. They're the result of a sequence of events, locked together in time. The science behind what went wrong is hidden in these seismic seconds. This is a reconstruction of the view from Senna's car as he approached that final corner at close on 200 miles per hour. But to understand what went wrong, we have to wind back the clock and start at the beginning of lap 7, the last lap of Ayrton Senna's brief but brilliant life.
Motor racing at its very highest level is the most extreme form of human endeavour outside of war, and Ayrton Senna was the most extreme practitioner of it. That's what we lost at Tamburello.
Few people really do know myself. Few people know me, and they just don't understand what it takes from a racing driver to eventually come to Formula One, being successful.
Ayrton Senna was an extraordinary man, blessed with an extraordinary skill. His desire to win led him to leave a comfortable life in his beloved Brazil for a sporting arena where performance is everything and danger is never far away. His skill and ambition were legendary.
He wanted always to be the best. He showed all the time competition. He showed all the time that he want to win. Even to go into the airport with a rental car, he want to be the first one.
The really, really great drivers who've won many world championships are also very clever, all of them. Ayrton was the absolute archetype. Who knows how many more world championships he would have won had he lived.
Formula One is the world's premier motorsport category, with more money, bigger television audiences and more technology than any other type of racing. Its unusual rules make it as much a competition between designers and engineers as it is between drivers.
One of the rules in Formula One, which is unique in all of racing, is that you have to make your own car. You have to design everything apart from the engine and the gearbox, which you are allowed to buy.
Since each team must design its own car, the pace of development is furious as each outfit tries to gain the upper hand by pouring money into research and technology. A single second over a whole lap is seen as a huge advantage, and the cars are set up with the utmost care. With so much effort and money at stake, the onus is firmly on the driver to make the utmost of his machine.
What Senna brought to the art of driving and the business of driving was an absolute total commitment to it. Now, those are very easy words to say, and in sport people do talk like that. He was prepared to stay at a track till midnight looking at telemetry, at computer printouts, asking people questions on and on and on, because he had to understand every single aspect of the car. And he literally wore technicians down by going through it again and again and again, because he absolutely had to know. And he raised that level of understanding and commitment to a place where it had never been before. And now, of course, it's become the norm. That's what he gave to it that's what he brought to it on the technical level.
As Ayrton Senna crossed the line to start his 7th lap of the San Marino Grand Prix, he was in pursuit of his 4th world title. He was in the lead, as was so often the case, travelling at 190 miles per hour. A computer on board his Williams FW16 registered the start of a new lap and began to record the 12.8 seconds of data that would tell the story of how Ayrton Senna died.
A few years ago, people started measuring all the bits and pieces on racing cars to try and advance their understanding of how they worked so they could make them go quicker. It started off with simple recorders measuring 2 or 3, maybe 4 parameters, and it's advanced, particularly during the era of Senna's accident, into very powerful loggers with huge memories that can log almost any parameter that you can imagine.
Even though data recording was developed to make the cars faster, it can also provide vital information as to the cause of an accident, in much the same way as an aircraft's black box. As Senna approached that final corner, the computer was recording hundreds of pieces of data every second. 9.1 seconds into lap 7, Senna's foot was flat to the floor, shown as over 100%. He had a point to prove.
Senna was facing a very real crisis. He'd gone to the Williams team because in theory it was the best car and it would give him the 4th World Championship. But thus far that season he hadn't scored any points at all. The car had proved very difficult. And far from winning all the races, which people said he might do, he hadn't actually been near finishing a race. So there was all the pressures, different pressures, came to bear on him. He had to deliver at Imola.
Imola in northern Italy is one of the fastest tracks in Formula One. It was the scene for the 3rd race in the championship that year. At the end of the straight lay a sweeping curve, a corner with a reputation and an enigmatic name, Tamburello.
There is a certain mystery over the corner called Tamburello. It was a very, very fast corner, flat-out corner, with just a little bit of grass, a little bit of road, and then a wall. So every single driver knew that, in theory, you could go around it safely forever and a day, but if something went wrong, you were in a lot of trouble with not much space to get out of it.
One of the consequences of the accident was to bring about the redesign of racing circuits the world over. Tamburello became a left-right chicane, forcing the drivers to slow down. But as of 2:17 on Sunday, May the 1st, 1994, it was still a severe and unforgiving test of the defining property of a Formula One car: the ability to corner at almost unbelievable speed. This staggering performance is quite literally conjured out of thin air, because a modern F1 car's design is dominated by aerodynamics. As strange as it may seem, a machine such as this is not so much a car, but an aeroplane flying upside down, very, very close to the ground.
The simplest aerodynamic device is a wing. On an aeroplane, the wing's mounted this way round, and the air has to go further around the top surface than the bottom surface, so the air going over the top has to go faster than the air going underneath. Faster air has a lower pressure, so it produces lift.
Daniel Bernoulli, a mathematician, established in the 18th century that the faster air travels, the lower its pressure. This is the fundamental principle behind both how aeroplanes fly and how Formula One cars stay on the track.
On a racing car, we take the wing and put it the other way up, so it produces a force in the downward direction, downforce.
Downforce is the holy grail for modern race car designers, because it pushes the car and therefore the tyres into the track, increasing their grip by as much as a factor of 4.
While a car's going around a corner, it tries to go straight on. This is a natural law of physics, and The only force you have to prevent the car flying off the road is the grip provided by the tyres.
All other things being equal, a car with 4 times its own weight in downforce will be able to corner 4 times faster than one with no downforce at all. It's this downforce-assisted grip that enables an F1 car to take a corner like Tamburello flat out, the engine turning at nearly 14,000 RPM. Travelling at almost 200 miles an hour, 11.2 seconds into lap 7, the car is crushed into the tarmac by nearly 4 times its own weight in downforce, generating huge grip. Just as a fighter pilot feels G-force during a turn, Senna felt this force pulling at him. Sensors on board indicated a reading of 3.62 G, or 3.62 times the force of gravity. If something went wrong now, the car would literally fly off the road. At this exact moment, 1.6 seconds before impact, something did go wrong. F1 star Michele Alboreto, who died in a crash after filming this interview, believed he knew what happened to Senna.
It's a dangerous corner because if you have a failure in the car, it was the wall very, very close in the high-speed part of the track. But I'm sure, because I know, because I had the same crash that Ayrton had in the same place, I know that you can go out in this corner only if you have a mechanical failure on the car.
If the car had broken, the responsibility for the death of the sport's greatest driver would rest with his team. The very idea sent a shockwave throughout Formula One. When Ayrton Senna was killed in 1994 at the San Marino Grand Prix in northern Italy, the multi-million-pound sport would never be the same again.
This would be a defining moment in motorsport. A defining moment in terms of safety.
Before the crash, it had always been acknowledged that Formula One was a risky business. Danger was part of the sport's glamour. But the loss of its number 1 superstar changed everything.
The impact sent a shockwave back. It sent a shockwave back to every single person within Formula One, but a shockwave back to the teams themselves, because if something could fail on a car with those consequences, they all desperately wanted to know what it was so that they'd make sure it didn't happen to them. You just can't have people dying against walls.
What happened 1.6 seconds before impact? Why did the best driver in the world crash with such horrifying suddenness? Because the crash happened in Italy, where the law demands that any unnatural death be investigated, a trial was called. Mauro Foghieri was one of the expert investigators.
In my opinion, the crash was caused by the decision of Senna that something was strange in his driving wheel, because the driving wheel was moving too much.
Senna's Williams FW16 was carrying a miniature camera located here, just behind and to the left of the driver's head. It was able to see ahead of the car and some detail within it, notably this, a small bright yellow button mounted on the steering wheel. As the wheel turns, the button turns with it, allowing a computer to accurately plot every movement of the steering wheel. This button appeared to move in a very unexpected way, just as Senna lost control. On the approach to Tamburello, he turned to the left, aiming the car at the apex of the bend, taking the fastest line through the corner. This reconstruction shows the wheel moves quite significantly, not only about its center point as normal, but vertically as well. It was this movement that led to the theory that the steering column had broken.
So he realized that something strange was on, and so he decided to stop the car. If you are all in your driving in your car and you feel that your driving wheel is moving, what you believe that something is broken, and what you do, you stop the car. Of course he was stopping a car from 320 kilometers per hour. That was a different question.
The steering column was made in the most part of 22mm steel tube, but had been modified at the driver's request to make it longer. An extra section of 18mm tube was grafted in and welded at both ends. In the wreckage of Senna's car, the column was found to have broken. But did it break causing the accident, or was it broken by the accident? The answer lay in the computer on board the Williams FW16.
Senna's car had power steering. Because it had power steering, one of the things that they were measuring on the car was the twisting force that he was applying to the steering column. Because they were measuring that at all times, right up to impact, you can look at the information off the car from the black box and see that up to the moment of impact, it wasn't broken.
This is the data from the last 1.4 seconds before impact. The figures in green refer to the amount of twisting force that the column was experiencing. Had the column been broken, it would be impossible to apply a twisting force to it. So this final figure of -7.18 proves that the column was intact. So why did Senna's wheel appear to move up and down inside the car? Well, it was designed that way. This exclusive footage, seen here for the first time in public, shows the amount of vertical wheel movement available in an identical Williams Formula One car. The amount of effort required to deflect it this much is quite considerable, but remember, the driver is being subjected to G-forces in excess of 3 times the force of gravity, and with nothing save the wheel to take the weight of the driver's arms, the design allowed for this much movement. So if the steering column didn't break, what else could have caused Senna's accident? The cruel irony is that in the relentless search for cornering performance through aerodynamics, the cars had become dangerously unstable.
With the regulations that were in practice at the time of Ayrton's crash, the car had to run very, very close to the ground. And we're talking here about this far above the ground. We're not talking about road car type figures of inches, we're talking about millimetres.
The reason that this distance, called the ride height, was so tiny was due once again to the basic physical principle that fast air creates low pressure.
The designer tries to get maximum possible velocity of air underneath the car because that way he generates a low pressure and sucks the car to the ground.
The faster the air can be made to travel under the car, the lower its pressure, just as the Bernoulli principle dictates. And the way to get the air to travel very fast is to minimize the ride height, because the smaller the gap, the faster the air has to travel to squeeze through it. A very low car means very high downforce.
The problem comes as the car gets lower and lower and lower, the velocity gets higher and higher, you get more and more downforce. Eventually, if it touches the ground, the airflow stops. You get a sudden loss of downforce, sudden loss of grip, which gives the driver a big problem in the middle of the corner.
The key to a good lap time was in Senna's era a technical balancing act. The rewards for getting it right were in racing terms substantial.
Lowering the car 1 millimetre, which is less than a 1/16 of an inch, would make the car go several tenths of a second quicker. At some circuits, maybe as much as half a second quicker a lap. So all competitive teams would be running their car absolutely on the limit of as low as they possibly could.
If anything unexpected should happen to reduce the ride height to below the critical setting, trouble would be in store for the driver. At exactly 11.0 seconds into Senna's 7th lap, something had reduced the ride height of the Williams. Television viewers saw an explosion of sparks, indicating that the car was indeed touching the ground in the middle of one of the fastest corners in the whole of Formula One. What was it that was causing Senna's car to scrape along the ground that day in 1994?
In the case of Senna's accident, there was a bad incident at the start. So it was decided to start the race behind the safety car. Now the safety car is just a road car driven at reasonable speed, but way below anything that a racing car would ever do.
The race at Imola was only the second time a safety car had been used on a dry track in Formula One, and it played havoc with the cars crawling round behind it. The tyres cooled down from their normal hot racing temperatures, causing them to contract, and it was this that caused the drop in the oh-so-critical ride height.
It would normally be just skating, just touching the ground in those places, on those bumps. Well, of course, with the tyre pressures down by maybe 25%, the movement in the tyre was maybe up by 4 or 5 millimetres. And when the skid, which is metallic, hits the ground, rather than having a huge grip that sticky racing rubber has, and is being pointed in the correct direction by the driver, you have it's just like a ski.
So, not only had a large amount of downforce been removed from the car by denying the airflow underneath it, the car was also resting, for this split second only, on the metal skids beneath it. The car was suddenly unable to generate the grip it needed to get round the corner. At 11.2 seconds, the back of the car stepped out. With lightning reactions, Ayrton Senna steered into the slide a tenth of a second later. The front of the car gripped and turned it to the right. The data logger recorded that the brakes were fully on. The car was now slowing down as hard as possible, but Ayrton Senna ran out of road.
When all said and done, the really tragic thing about Ayrton's crash was that if it wasn't for one little thing, he would have been able to jump out of the car and walk back to his spare for the restart. And that little thing was that when his car hit the wall, the front wheel was trapped between the wall and the chassis as the suspension collapsed. And as the car skidded along the wall, the wheel trapped between the two just popped up at the wrong moment and hit him in the head. If it wasn't for that, he would have been uninjured.
Senna died just over 4 hours later in hospital. On his return to his native Brazil, he was given a burial in keeping with his status as a national hero. Fans flocked to pay their respects, and his country declared 3 days of official mourning. The lessons learned from his accident changed the sport forever, and without a doubt has saved many a life since. It is perhaps a fitting legacy to a great man.
Tot zover deze aflevering van Seconds from Death. Na de onderbreking belandt de Mummy Roadshow in grotten in het oerwoud.